Hey everyone, how's everybody doing? So thanks for having me. Thanks Madeline. Thanks others for the warm welcome. Try to get a little bit so that I don't get the feedback. There we go. So I don't think that you can come here and give a speech at the Clinton School of Public Service at the University of Arkansas without relaying a Bill Clinton story. So here's mine. This was when I was a young cub reporter. I was working at the public radio station in Gainesville, Florida, WWFT. It was the fall of 1992. The heart of the presidential campaign between Bill Clinton, President H.W. Bush, and that other guy, Ross Perot. It was a fun and spirited race. Florida was in play, and the thought of the words hanging in Chad in a presidential election in Florida were years in the future. Bill Clinton and Al Gore had teamed up to barnstorm across the state in a 2-day bus tour. And I'd been assigned to cover one of their campaign stops in nearby Ocala, Florida. Ocala was, and still is, a pretty conservative place. Rural in many parts, like a lot of America. It was also home to thoroughbred horses. Thoroughbred horses, they call it the horse capital of the world. In fact, there was a sign just outside of town that said, basically boasting about all the horses that were born and bred there who went on to compete and win at the Kentucky Derby. And it's actually still true today. As I was preparing some of these comments, I actually double-checked as I was writing this up. And 10 of the 20 contenders of last year's Kentucky Derby had ties to Marion County. So I thought, given that horses are important to that part of North Central Florida, it was probably appropriate that this big Clinton-Gore rally that I covered was held at an outdoor rodeo arena. I must confess to you that I don't really remember the speech all that well. I mean, does anyone really ever remember a presidential stump speech? What's that? Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, yes? Okay, sorry. I did. That's my family as a journalist. But here's what I do remember. I do remember it being a decent crowd, and I also remember that I was totally in the wrong spot after the speech had finished. It was my first presidential speech. And what I didn't know was that you had to go with all the other reporters to interview the candidates when the speech was over. I just thought, hey, the speech is done. It's time for me to go. I'm going to rush back to the newsroom and put my story together. And as I'm seeing this, way off in the distance, way over there, I could see this big gaggle of journalists swarming Clinton and Gore. And there was no way that I was getting up there in time. I mean, there were tons of people everywhere, and I was really stuck. So I waited it out, and seeing all the interviews that were being done over there, and really regretting the fact that I was not there. So as I say, I waited it out, and then I had this great idea that I was going to sneak out underneath the metal bleachers. And I figured, all right, I'm not going to get over there, I might as well just leave. And so there I am, I'm sort of bobbing and I'm weaving through the metal beams along the dusty ground, and I still remember the dust was sort of illuminated by these shards of sunlight that were shooting through. And it was amazing. And then, so as I was sort of making my way, totally by myself, dodging, working my way through the beams, and I noticed this throng of people walking towards me, underneath. Having the same idea I did. I was like, that's weird. They were dressed in suits. They were serious looking. They had earpieces in their ear. And they were not happy to see me walking towards them. And that's when I realized it's Governor Clinton's his Secret Service detail coming towards me. Had the same idea I did. Like, this is how you leave quickly and avoid the crowds. And I guess they had mapped out this great exit. And they really weren't expecting anyone, especially this cub reporter, to be down there. And so they were rushing by me, and I said, Governor Clinton, you have a minute for me. And he stopped with a smile, as Bill Clinton does. And his detail surrounded me, and he let me ask one question. It was something about higher education funding, and it probably wasn't my best question ever. But I still remember that encounter to this day. Of course, Bill Clinton would not take Florida that year. It was tight. It was tight, though. But Bill Clinton did win that big horse race in 1992, so that is my Bill Clinton story from 25 years ago. I've told a lot of stories over the years, and I'm going to tell you a few here. Got a few minutes of a prepared speech. I'll tell you a couple of clips of some stories that we've done, just sort of talking about things, and I'm going to open up to questions. And I want to hear what you guys have to say and questions you may have and that are like. So I've interviewed a lot of people over the years, including every president since 1991 are covering their events. But the stories that I like best are the stories about people. Here's the thing about journalism. People remember stories about people. You can say it. It's okay, speak up. People remember stories about people. And as we learned during the last presidential campaign, it's vitally important to get out there. It's vitally important to get out there, to talk to people, to get away from the bubble of whatever it is that's capturing the attention that day. Your friends, your comfort zone, you need to talk to people, you need to listen. And most importantly, you need to engage. You need to engage with people. That's probably something the media didn't quite do enough of in the last year, is engage with people. There was some shock, there was some surprise about the outcome of the election. You know, it's a pretty fractured media landscape out there. There's not a lot of trust. Certain people say that they don't trust the media. That's probably unfair. It's not just a media thing, though. It's a lot of it's on you, too. You need to seek out different voices, and you need to talk to people. Not at them, but with them. Talk with people. Engage in conversations. Social media has really changed a lot of things. It's good in some ways. Immediacy. But it's also bad in others, and a level of discourse, and a level of immediate discourse that happens. That rips across Facebook, that rips across Twitter. It can be so vicious, and yet there is good in it too. My colleague Jeff Brady had a wonderful story on about a week ago. It's part of our Kitchen Table series. It's part of our effort to sort of talk to people in a safe space, a place where they find comfort to talk about issues. And we profiled a woman from Pennsylvania who had voted for Trump. And on Facebook later, the comments about that story were coming in fast and furious, including one from a Hillary Clinton supporter who called the woman an idiot. And it was just one of many tough comments that we heard on that story on that day. And you know, if you've paid any attention to social media in the past year, you've probably noticed how quick people are to delve into name calling and finger pointing. And they say some pretty shocking things sometimes, things that probably you would never say to someone's face. So we actually reached out to a number of the people who criticized the lady in our story. And we actually talked to the woman who called our interviewee an idiot. We actually brought the two of them together for a face-to-face chat, and it was beautiful radio. Let me play just a clip of this right now, just about a minute or so you can hear just an excerpt of that story.
Facebook who had nasty, we reached out to 10 people on Facebook who had nasty comments for Jamie Rupert. Only 2 responded. One of them happens to live in the next county over from Jamie, and she agreed to meet us at a local hotel. Walking down the hallway, I asked Jamie how she feels about the meeting.
I'm a little nervous, meeting somebody new with opposing views as you. You don't even know, a lot of times when you meet somebody, you don't even know what they think or whatever about you, but I already know, so it's a little scary. I won't lie.
All right, here we go. So, Jamie? Oh yes, we brought cookies. Amy White Knight.
Hi, nice to meet you.
The first thing you notice about Amy White Knight is her bright pink hair. Beyond that, the two women have a lot in common. Both grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. They're in their 30s, both are nurses, and they're moms. Historically, they voted for Democrats, but this time Amy chose Hillary Clinton and Jamie chose Donald Trump. As the conversation starts, I ask Amy to read her Facebook comment that was directed at Jamie.
The only good thing about Trump getting elected is that idiots like this will get a big kick in the ass. The bad part is we will all have to suffer along with these unintelligent Trump supporters.
Do you still feel that same way?
Oh yeah, a little bit.
The two were sitting next to each other on a couch. I asked Jamie how it feels to hear this in person.
Well, it's hurtful. I mean, she doesn't even know me. She's basing my intelligence off of one decision. You know, that's like just being so judgmental and very unfair.
And the story goes on. I think that's an important story. I think it gets at a lot of what's going on in our country, that it's important to listen, to disagree. There's nothing wrong with disagreement, but to listen. Listening is so important, especially right now. Now, the topic of my speech tonight is supposed to be about covering the South, and that's why you're here. But I actually think it needs to be broader than that. I think we need to talk about just coverage in general. And as Southern Bureau Chief of NPR, my main job is to work with public radio newsrooms across the South, stations like KUAR and Arkansas Public Media. NPR is a strong network of stations and newsrooms like this all across the country. And I don't think we as a country have ever witnessed a fracturing of the media landscape like we see now. Newspapers are shedding staff, and that's a real loss for us all. We need reporters, we need watchdogs, people to watch over everything. And it's not just what's happening on Capitol Hill, but it's the town councils, it's the county commissions, it's the water boards, you name it. Wherever the decisions are being made, that's what we need. And historically, we have always relied on newspapers to be that venue, the avenue for us. Newspapers who would hire hundreds of reporters, even at the smallest of dailies, who would fan out, they would dig in, find what those in power didn't want the rest of us to see. That dynamic has changed. And on some levels, I think that dynamic has changed radically so. Where I live, in Birmingham, Alabama, the local newspaper now only publishes 3 days a week. 3 days a week. Think about that. So that the news that I get when the paper shows up, it's days old, the analysis is stale, and they sell it by saying, go to our website, get it now, update it in real time. But the paper laid off huge chunks of their staff. The long-time watchdogs are gone. And it's not just Birmingham. The same thing has happened in New Orleans, and Cleveland, and other cities across the country. And listeners, people like you have noticed. Listening to public radio is up in big ways across the country. It's up for commercial radio stations, yes, but public radio listening is soaring. And I think it's because people realize that there's really nowhere to get that kind of straight-ahead, calm, factual, fair, middle-of-the-road reporting. NPR is stepping up in other ways, and maybe you've heard it on some of the airwaves already. A few months back, we announced the creation of a state governance project. I mean, it's got a really bad title, State Governance Project. But it's about government. And, you know, most titles are that way, right? They're about government. It's an ambitious project to work with our partner stations across public radio to cover state government. As our friends in the commercial media increasingly are stepping away from what happens in the state houses, we're trying to fill that void. We've hired an editor whose sole job is to work with state house reporters around the country. When we announced this project, our editorial director and senior vice president of news, Mike Oreskes, summed it up this way, talking about gridlock and ideological conflict in Washington have pushed many important decisions to state governments, just as many organizations have retreated from covering those governments, and how your government depends more than ever on where you live. States run by Democrats are focused on enacting ever more liberal policies. Those run by Republicans are increasingly conservative. We said we need to use public media to fill the gap in state house coverage created as wires and local newspapers pull back on their coverage of state government. We need to make our stories better, not just different, but by having NPR and other stations plan their coverage together. We believe, for example, that we will see stories and trends that we might otherwise have missed when we work together. And working as this collaborative team should lead both to better daily coverage and ultimately to more groundbreaking enterprise reporting. And we're doing other joint projects too, like creating topical areas where stations and NPR's editorial team are tightly integrated. We're doing it in health, education, military, and with our investigative unit. Here's a clip there recently in Morning Edition. It was part of a joint investigation we did with a few stations on our military team. And we examined benefits going to veterans.
An effort to help American veterans get medical care faster is not working. NPR and some of its member stations have investigated a multi-billion-dollar U.S. government program for veterans. It is supposed to add more doctors, nurses, and other medical staff in VA medical centers. The idea was that more staff would cut wait times, which sounds pretty simple, but it doesn't work that way. So let's talk about this. First, with Steve Walsh, who's a reporter with our member station KPBS in San Diego. Hi, Steve.
Hi, Steve.
What's gone wrong?
Well, so the VA got about $2.5 billion to hire new medical staff. One of our findings is that there was no real pattern to where those doctors and nurses and other staff were sent. So, for example, wait times for mental health were really bad 2 years ago in San Diego. I think San Diego's VA would have gotten more help since, after all, the stakes were really high when you're talking about mental health care.
But they didn't get more help, is what you're saying? That particular facility didn't get any more staff?
Well, not as much as they thought they would.
As I said, and then it goes on for a while. The partnerships that we create with our stations are important. It's our future. It's your future. It's about where you get your news. Many of the names that you hear on NPR, names like that guy you just heard, Steve Inskeep, David Shaper, Scott Horsley, Sarah McCammon, Debbie Elliott, Kurt Sigler, Tamara Keith. You know what those names all have in common? Anyone? They all got their start working at public radio stations as young cub reporters. I didn't include my name, but that station in Gainesville, Florida, yeah, the one where I had my chance encounter with Bill Clinton, that was my first job. Stations are so vital in so many ways. They connect people to their communities, giving them a source of learning that not only to learn about what's happening around the world and the country, but here at home where you live. The thread through all of this is having journalists on the ground, living and working in the communities that they report on, that parachute journalism, the people who live here, who see the same things that you do, have the same curiosity that you have. You need seasoned reporters really to sort through the important issues of our day. Here in the South, these issues have resonance. They capture attention, are often some of the same that we've wrestled with for a long time. One that immediately comes to mind is race. Where I live in Birmingham, race is something that's always in the background. My city still wrestles with it. Of course, it's not like it was in the heyday of the 1960s during the era of police dogs and hoses and KKK church bombings and children's marches. One of the most important and visited parts of Birmingham is the local Civil Rights Institute. It's an amazing place with such an incredible array of history from that time. The last time I was here in Little Rock, I stopped by Central High School. And as we think through the past few decades, race is something that bubbles up, especially here in the South, especially in the background. It's been a common thread to many of our biggest stories, certainly in the past few years. I'm thinking about the shooting of Trayvon Martin 5 years ago, this month in fact, in Sanford, Florida. He was the unarmed 17-year-old that neighborhood watch volunteer followed, confronted, and then shot after they got into the stuff. I covered that trial. I heard almost every word of the testimony. I think of another name, Dylan Roof, the young man who went into a historic church in Charleston, South Carolina. He sat there during a Wednesday evening Bible study in 2015. After an hour of sitting there, took out a gun, he shot and killed 9 people. Why? He said he wanted to start a race war. A race war. He was just sentenced to death for those killings. That's a story that we follow closely since it happened. Here's a clip that my colleague Debbie Elliott put together just before the trial began. I think it's important.
Charleston is known as the Holy City. Church steeples dominate the skyline. On Sundays, you hear church bells throughout. Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church started here in the early 1800s and is known as Mother Emanuel, the oldest AME church in the South.
In Charleston, religion and churches represent identity. So you attack my church, you attack me.
The Reverend Pylon Middleton is pastor of Mount Zion AME Church, tucked in a leafy street near the College of Charleston, just a few blocks from Emmanuel. From his pastor study, Middleton describes the close ties between the two churches.
Mount Zion is the actual daughter church of Mother Emanuel. This church came out of that church in 1887.
So it's personal, even more so for Middleton. He grew up with Reverend Pinckney, and the two were best friends, like brothers, he says.
Everything has changed. Nothing is the same.
He calls the Emmanuel mass shooting a targeted terrorist attack that shatters the myth of a post-racial America.
It has now opened the dialogue for larger, well-meaning, thinking people to see that, wait, there are individuals who who really systemically have problems with black people by virtue of the fact that they're black.
Officials say suspect Dylan Roof had written a white supremacist manifesto online talking about taking his fight to historic Charleston because of its significant black population. It included pictures of the blonde young man holding a handgun and waving the Confederate battle flag. Less than a month later, the South Carolina legislature voted to remove that flag from the grounds of the State House, something civil rights activists, including Clemente Pinckney, had sought for decades. Standing in front of Mother Emanuel, the Reverend Joseph Darby of the Charleston NAACP says the massacre here was a defining moment.
Because of what happened in Charleston, will never be the same on many levels. And I don't think America will be the same. It put a hard and raw face on American racism.
Darby believes the Emanuel shooting could be a catalyst for social change in much the way that the 1963 Birmingham church bombing was during the Civil Rights Movement.
South Carolina operates by what I like to call raging politeness. We don't like to bring up anything that's touchy, that might be offensive, and the horrors that happened in Birmingham, the 16th Street bombing, the police dogs, the whole Bull thing, rubbed things wrong, so that folk had to deal with it. Just rub things wrong.
It was a call to action. Margaret Seidler is...
That story actually went on for 6 or 7 more minutes. We really sort of got it. I think that's a good example about what we tell and why we tell it. It's not comfortable to hear for a lot of people to hear that, but it's important to hear. And that's what we show time and time again. Staying in the Charleston area with the killing of Walter Scott, shocked a lot of America. That was also in 2015. He was the black man who was pulled over for a broken taillight in his Mercedes. During the stop, he fled and he was chased by Officer Michael Slater. There was some sort of struggle, and Scott ran away, and Slater shot him in the back. It wasn't until that infamous cell phone video surfaced which really fueled public outrage. Slater's trial in state court ended in a hung jury. He's going to be retried, and also has a trial scheduled in federal court. And these are just the killings in the South. Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. The police chokehold death of Eric Garner in the Bronx. We go on and on. You get the idea. Race is an issue that's still a struggle today. It's a constant theme, not unlike the struggles about just life itself. Sort of what the last presidential campaign was fought over, the haves, the have-nots. And that race turned into vastly different visions of the future of the United States, different tone, different language, different values, differences. Differences are where we find each other now. There's nothing wrong with any of that. The important thing is to listen, to talk. Talking is good. Talking with people who agree and who disagree with you. So, with that, let's talk. All right. I think we have a microphone that is coming around. So, do you have questions? Speak up. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. Did someone else?
How about you, sir?
Okay. To answer my question, I worked at KUAF as a student, and I did a documentary about dairy farmers who were struggling on their farms and eventually had to leave, and that sets up my question, which is, do you think rural America, especially the rural South, has been misunderstood by the media?
I don't know. I mean, historically, the media is headquartered in Washington or New York or Los Angeles. A lot of people live there. We in public media feel that it's important to have people living and working and tapping into where people live. I'm the Southern Bureau Chief. I don't live in Washington. I don't live in Los Angeles. I don't live in New York. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. That's the deep South as you can get. Debbie Elliott, who has worked for us for a long time, is also based in Alabama. We have 200 public radio newsrooms across the country. Newsrooms like KUAR, newsrooms like KUAF in Fayetteville. Jackie Froelich is in this room. I'm going to make her stand up so y'all can see her. You probably know the voice, Jacqueline Froelich. Jackie, she's in the back. So, see, that's the real royalty in the room. You hear her on Arkansas Public Media. You hear her when she's reporting for NPR. We feel it's important to have journalists everywhere to reflect where people live, to make sure that we reflect, we want our stories to reflect where people live and what they hear and what they think about. Other thoughts, questions, things you always wondered about NPR? Yes, ma'am?
How do they choose the people they interview? In the first place, how did you find the first one? You know, how do they sift through that?
Yeah, I actually don't know how we chose that one. The woman from Pennsylvania who was the Trump supporter, I actually don't know how we found her. Oftentimes it's when we give a reporter assignment, it's up to them to go sort of find it. I can talk to you specifically about the last story I heard from Debbie Elliott, because I was actually her field producer for that story, so I was there with her. So we lined up a bunch of interviews in advance, and oftentimes when you interview one person, the last question that we ask in the interview is, who else do you think we should talk to? We don't presume to necessarily know everyone that we should talk to, but we like to tap into the local knowledge and the local wisdom. We work closely with member station reporters when we go into areas like that that we don't live in, to make sure that we're accurately reflecting that place. We oftentimes talk to lots of people, and we talk to them for long times, and we use the very best from those interviews in our stories. We might sit down and do a 40-minute conversation with somebody and pull out 2 little 20-second sound bites, which isn't a lot, but it is characterizes the conversation or as part of the story that we hope to tell.
Okay. It's sort of a complex question.
But I like those.
Okay, great. You'll love this one.
Guy's the editor of the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so during the fall, I taught a course for the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service. And one of my students, who's sitting right behind me, was, well, the school held a challenge predicting the outcome of the election. And she was the only one who accurately predicted a Trump victory. A friend of mine, another friend of mine, Tufar Muhammad, who you might guess by the name, is a black Muslim, also, you know, had said beforehand, look, you travel the country, Trump's going to win. You know, you can't not see this happening. And the thing is that many of us, white liberals, thought that was something that was impossible. And it rather reminds me of what the philosopher Charles Mills said, that to grow up white is to be in an epistemology of ignorance. You know, you're unable to see the structures that provide you privilege and the like. And so I wonder if, you know, for the purposes of getting an actual read on American life, if there is any effort within NPR to try to diversify the people who work for the group, the people you send out to do reporting and the like, because it's clear a lot of us missed things.
Well, complex question. No easy answers, I don't think. We as people tend to hang out with people that look like us. We tend to share the same views that we do. You see it on Facebook, people you follow on Twitter. And it tends to be sort of like this echo chamber. And so you have people that really believe that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And then you had another subset of people that really believed Donald Trump was going to win. And they sort of believed what they thought. Sarah McCammon, who covered the Trump campaign for us and spent 18 months tagging along on the trail, wasn't surprised he won at all. She went to all the rallies, saw the fervor, saw the energy, saw the passion that you didn't quite see in some of the Hillary Clinton gatherings. You know, Sarah's from the Midwest, Kansas City, evangelical background. You know, we had Asma Khalid reporting for us as well. She wore a hijab. And the number of hateful, hurtful things that people said to her, those things were amazing. Sam Sanders, the young black man, also covering it. I think the people that we had on the trail were fairly diverse and fairly reflective of America. You know, we had a campaign reporter following Clinton and a campaign reporter following Trump. And we were sort of there listening and talking to people. But it's clear the media in general, just all the media, I mean, all we thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, were shocked with the results of election night. I had friends where I live in Alabama that said there's no way that she's going to win. No way she's going to win. And again, part of that's just where you live and who you associate with. But I think media in general are doing a lot of soul searching, which is sort of the point of what I was talking about. It's important to listen, it's important to talk, it's important to have disagreements, but it's important to be out there. And this is my concern as news organizations scale back and try to do less with less. That's a problem. That you have the whole notion of fake news, which I don't understand that. News is what news is. Do you know what's happening this weekend in Florida? Donald Trump is giving a rally. Do you know what it's being called? No, it's not the victory rally. It's actually a campaign rally. So the race for the 2020 election apparently begins this weekend. Donald Trump has a gathering where his campaign is the one that's organizing it. It seems like it's non-stop campaigning in this day and age. So we'll see. We'll see how the media can do a better job of it. I think it's important to have reporters, to have people connected, to talk to people, to don't mind the disagreements. And one thing that I tell my reporters all the time is don't interview people that look like you. We as journalists tend to when you go into a crowd, you walk up and kind of interview someone that looks like you. And I think that's also bad. I challenge people, my reporters, to go interview people that don't look like you. Mix it up. You need to diversify. Because if you want to reflect what America looks like, you have to have a reporting workforce that's also diverse. You have to have people that are of all stripes, all beliefs, and talk it out.
Right here. Two quick comments and one question. One, I think your view of racism is a little historically narrow. Racism is the Europeans came from America.
Sure.
So I think if there's a conversation about racism, it needs to be much larger context. Two, I do like these collaborations that NPR has created, such as Inside Energy. However, I've been very disappointed with Inside Energy as an example because, and I don't know if it's because they're based in Wyoming, but they focus only on fossil fuels and only on that industry and what's happening to the people in that industry. They don't focus on any other issue with energy, whether that's the grid, whether that's renewables, anything. I mean, they talk about nothing else but oil and coal. And my question is, going forward, I don't know if you saw today's or listened to today's press conference.
I did not. I was talking to my colleagues.
I suggest you go back and listen to that. Given this climate of a man who was elected president who doesn't care about facts, isn't interested, isn't curious, doesn't want to learn, doesn't want briefings, all he hears about our ratings and what people are saying about him. Like today, he lied, very stupid, lied to the press when it was assembled. Very quickly, one of the reporters called him out on it, and he got, he was getting very upset because, and his response was, well, I don't know that, I don't know, somebody just gave me that back. What is your responsibility in the news to handle that?
Well, he's entitled to say what he wants to say and believe what he wants to believe. That's our job in the media, to hold his feet to the fire like we have in every other president. And that's kind of what
that's what happened during the campaign.
It was a pretty chaotic campaign, wasn't it?
Did you think that there was equal treatment?
So here's the thing. So I wasn't responsible for any of our political coverage. I don't have any of our Trump coverage. And so I'm probably not the right one to answer that. So I really...
Did you not listen to it?
I listened a little bit of it. But even now, if we move forward, I think we wrestle with, how do you cover this? Especially as you do interviews, and someone says something and you have to go back and fact check it, but it's hard if it's a live interview to fact check live on the air when you're about 5 minutes second. I think it's important that we continue to press people to get to the bottom, to get to the truth. Continue to ask the hard questions.
But what would you do? But when you don't get the answers, look at lies. What do you do? What's your responsibility?
Continue to report what it is that's being said, and if something is not true, you just say it's untrue. And continue to say that over and over again. I think that's what we've done in this month in office, and we'll continue to do it as long as he says something that's not right. We'll continue to say it. When you talk about coverage, I think you have to look at our when you talk about specifically the energy coverage. I don't know everything that Inside Energy has done for us. I haven't heard everything that they do for us. But just for instance, this week I finished up a story with Sarah McCammon that will air later this week about a wind farm in the south. It's in North Carolina. It's just opened as the first one of its kind. And the whole story is about why is this the first wind farm in the south? There more. And we get into sort of what's up with the south. And so you need to look at sort of our whole depth and breadth of coverage of what we do. Because it may not hear everything in one story that you would like, but when you look across the stuff that we do, we get some of the things that you talked about in other ways, in other disciplines.
Right here.
Hi, my name is Hannah Vaughn. I'm a first-year student at Clinton School. And when not in graduate school, I'm a high school teacher. And last year, I had all of my 10th grade students create podcasts for the first time. And I'm curious, if you were in the room with them, what advice you would give to young people trying to sort of dip their toe into radio, podcasts, that type of storytelling?
So I'm curious, show of hands, how many people listen to podcasts here? It's a lot more than I would have thought. There's sort of a running joke that podcasts are our future. I think podcasts are a part of our future. I think it's one of many things that people want to listen to. Actually, I don't listen to podcasts. I listen actually to just what we do over the air. I do a lot of reading, and I do a lot of listening. But I don't do a lot of podcast listening just because my commute is really short. And when I get to work, I don't have time to sit and listen. So I do a lot of listening about what's over the air. The thing about podcasts too is, you got to find your thing, whatever it is that you like. You got to find that niche that you can be good at. During the campaign, our colleagues at NPR Politics, probably heard that podcast maybe once or twice, became a soaring hit because it was just sort of talking about things and more than you could hear on All Things Considered in Morning Edition. It was an opportunity to really sort of dig deep for the people that really care. And I think that's where it really excels, is to find that thing that's going on out there in the world, but can let that breathe into a nice organic conversation. I mean, we're proud of ourselves as we'll let reporters tell a story that could be 5, 6, 8, 15, 20 minutes. There's an eternity on the radio or the podcast. You can let someone go forever. And that's not always good journalism either. When you let somebody go long.
I should clarify. It was less about the podcast piece and more about storytelling verbally. So I'm curious from your perspective as on the radio, what advice you give to a young person?
So, in general, here's what I say, is that A, people remember stories about people, so you need to have good, strong characters in your story. When a reporter goes out and does a bunch of interviews for a story, it might be like a 4-minute story, but it might take a week or two to get all the interviews, to do all the research. And in the course of that reporting, the reporter may learn 20 things, or 30 things, that are just neat. And the compulsion from a reporter standpoint is to want to put those 20 things or 30 things into a story. And there's no way as a listener you can remember 20 things or 30 things. The average listener in a 4-minute story generally remembers 3 things. And so what I say to reporters is put the 3 best things that you learned in your story, because that's about what we can remember. And that's kind of the same sort of advice I would give to those putting podcasts, is you don't have to put everything in a podcast that you learn, because that's going to be too much. Tell me the neat fun stuff and dig down a bit into it.
Okay, my name is Sean, and I'm the senior student at the University of Central Arkansas.
I don't have a question, but I'd like to make a short point, because I think it's just towards me. It's my understanding that the role of the media is, to provide people with the right information. And I also understand that when journalists have this kind of, maybe so basically you can write any story that you want. But truly, well, we could say that, from the late, the recent campaign, the recent election, that's why a lot of people believe that what they did, this man, that they did somehow. So they decided, not to follow, news of coverage anymore, based on the fact that, well, they don't want to be, misled anymore. And so I want to hear what you have to say to those people regarding that, if there is any, complete solution to that, or maybe we should just, stay where we are right now.
Well, I think, my hope would be is that people stay engaged.
Could you repeat that?
So
basically, I want to know, what you have to say to those people who believe that, well, they don't trust the media anymore because they did this many times. Basically, I understand that when some media are really biased, and I'm not really concerned about that. But what media, provides people with, news without evidence, without facts. I think that, this is very concerning. So I want to hear what you have to say to this.
So the question is basically those people who tune out, who don't believe what the media is saying, or they've heard something that they don't believe is true, and is that something that is a good or bad thing as we move forward? What should people do? Is that fair? So my immediate response is that I would hope people will not tune out. We need to stay engaged, especially now in this day and age, when you see the craziness in which is going on. President Trump, I think it was Jeb Bush who said, during the campaign, Jeb Bush said he's a chaos candidate and he would be a chaos president. And I think what you're seeing in the first month is very chaotic. But in many respects, what he's done is what he said he would do. And the things that he campaigned about are the things that he's gone after and done. And so for the people who voted for him, he is doing what it is that he said he was going to do. I think it's very important for people to stay engaged, to even if you disagree, even if you don't believe in what the other side is saying, that's okay. But it's important to stay engaged, to listen, to have a voice, and to be engaged.
We have time for one more question. Let's go here. You got a question?
How would you characterize the media's role in facilitating discussion or lack thereof on these issues?
I think it's important for the media to talk about race. I think it's important for the media to engage and to speak with folks of all stripes. At NPR, we've created a team called Code Switch, which really drills down into lots of racially based issues. But we have lots of other reporters who have covered race their entire careers that aren't part of the Code Switch. Debbie Elliott is one of those who's covered race for us for decades. Only she does it in a real nice way that sort of gets at some of the challenges about what we face. It's a tough one to cover, it's a tough one to talk about, but it's an important one to talk about because, again, as I say, most people tend to associate with people that look like themselves, and that's not good. You need to talk with others as well.
Yeah, well, it was a tie, so we've got another about 60 seconds. Go ahead. Yes.
What plan or what is NPR doing to work towards preservation of the audio files that they are creating? You've mentioned how good newspapers have been in educating the public, and of course newspapers are one of the things that historians rely on. Broadcast media has not been as good about preserving. Is there, and especially with local things, is there an effort to be sure to preserve these and make them accessible for later historians?
So what I can talk about is what we're doing at NPR. I can talk about the local stations where each individually do what they do. So at NPR, every story that we broadcast, you can actually go to our website, you can listen to it, and you can download it in high quality, MP3. It's all there. So everything that you hear, you can go and get. And it's completely searchable. And we're getting to a point where, and we also put up full transcripts now, so it's also fully searchable. So that even if you don't have to then go through and listen to a story, you can actually go to the transcript and see it. And I think at the moment you can probably go back at least 2 decades and hear everything that we've broadcast in the last 2 decades. I would.
Well, how about a round of applause for